I came to save my father from the monster killing him with his medicine. I was ready for anything, but when I raised the syringe with the antidote, he stopped me. He looked me in the eyes and told me I was his true tormentor. In that moment, I understood he hadn't chosen me. He had chosen death. The road to Pine Creek narrowed gradually, like an artery clogged by a clot of time. The asphalt gave way to cracked concrete, which in turn surrendered to a packed gravel road that sent Anna's old sedan jolting with every pothole. The ancient pines that gave the town its name closed in overhead, their evergreen crowns weaving into a dense canopy that swallowed the bright daylight, leaving it to filter down in sparse, dusty shafts. The air grew thick, heavy with the scent of damp pine needles, wet earth, and something else, the bitter tang of wood smoke, the smell of a slow, inevitable decay. A familiar childhood feeling of suffocation washed over Anna, now amplified by years of absence. She wasn't coming home. She was arriving for an autopsy. The first houses appeared suddenly, materializing like ghosts from behind the wall of trees. Sagging fences, rusted roofs, the blind, boarded-up windows of the old schoolhouse where she had once sat at a desk. Across from it, in the town square, a bronze soldier stood frozen in perpetual grief, his form streaked with the green patina of moss. His gaze was fixed on the hollowed-out shell of the community hall, the remnants of a stage long deprived of music or applause visible through its shattered windows. The only sound to break the crushing silence was the piercing squeal of rusty swings on an abandoned playground, pushed back and forth by the wind. Her arrival did not go unnoticed. An old woman in a dark shawl, perched on a bench near the ruins of a general store with a sign faded beyond recognition, followed the car with a long, heavy stare. Another old man, leaning on a cane in his yard, didn't even nod, simply freezing in place to watch the stranger disrupt the frozen order of their world. This wasn't curiosity. Their gazes held a silent, hostile judgment. Anna gripped the steering wheel tighter. She wasn't a guest here. She was a threat. Her father's house stood at the very edge of town, its unfenced backyard bleeding seamlessly into the dense pine forest. It was a fortress built against time and loneliness. Climbing the creaking porch steps, Anna braced herself for the worst. The smell of old pain, the irritated grumbling of an arthritic old man, the accusations that she had once again come too late. But the door swung open before she could knock. Peter Cole stood on the threshold, and he was smiling. Calm and serene, he looked better than Anna had seen him in years. The once mighty frame of a logger, stooped by the weight of his illness, seemed to have straightened. His faded blue eyes, usually downcast to hide his pain, now held a strange, almost blissful radiance. "I had a feeling you were coming, sweetheart," he said, his voice, normally hoarse and abrupt, now sounding even and gentle. "Come on in, don't just stand there on the porch." Inside, the living room smelled of dry wood from the logs crackling in the stove, mingled with the scent of herbs. The large, scarred dining table was in its usual state of order. The old hunting rifle hung in its place on 2 wrought iron nails. Only a small photograph of her late mother in a simple wooden frame on the dresser seemed to watch the scene with a frozen smile. But something was wrong. Her father's euphoria was unnatural, like the feverish flush on a consumptive's cheek. "You look good, Dad," Anna managed, the words catching in her throat. "Good doesn't even cover it." Peter lowered himself into his deep, worn armchair, covered with a sheepskin, not even wincing. "I'm flying, Annie. Flying. And it's all thanks to him, our savior." He nodded reverently toward the small table beside his chair. There, among a stack of old Field and Stream magazines, sat an unassuming dark glass bottle. A handwritten label, penned in neat calligraphy, read, Dr. Wolf's Elixir. Dr. Arthur Wolf isn't a man. He's a saint, her father continued with rapture. He was the only one who understood my suffering. Not like those quacks at the county clinic with their pills. A couple of drops, and that's it. No aches, no pains. It's like being born again. Anna stepped closer, her gaze fixed on her father, yet seeing a patient. Years as a paramedic had trained her to read symptoms faster than a person could voice a complaint. She had seen this 100 times on late-night calls to squalid apartments and luxury condos. Peter's pupils were constricted to pinpoints. Meiosis. A classic, unmistakable sign. His speech, though euphoric, was slightly slurred, the words thick as syrup. His emotions were blunted, smoothed into a continuous, one-dimensional bliss. This wasn't healing. This was chemical. "Let me check your blood pressure," she said, keeping her voice steady. "It's probably been a while." She pulled a blood pressure cuff and stethoscope from her bag, her tools, her armor. As she wrapped the cuff around his gnarled, scarred arm, she briefly met his eyes. "Dad, look at me for a second." A short, sharp flash from her smartphone's light hit his pupils. There was no reaction. The two tiny black circles didn't even flinch, remaining inert. The diagnosis formed in her mind with cold, clinical clarity. Not a miracle. Chronic opioid intoxication. Her father, the stoic, a man carved from the same timber as the ancient pines, was hooked on a narcotic prescribed by the local saint. The mystery of Pine Creek was disgustingly simple. Anna removed the cuff and sat in the chair opposite him. It was time to act as she knew how. By the book. Eliminate the threat. "Dad, we need to have a serious talk," she began, choosing her words like a surgeon selects a scalpel. "What you're taking isn't medicine. Based on the symptoms, the constricted pupils, the delayed reactions, the euphoria, it's a powerful opioid analgesic, possibly homemade." She spoke clearly, dispassionately, using medical terms. She explained addiction, how it rewires the brain's chemistry. She described withdrawal syndrome, the hell that would begin the moment he stopped. She talked about the risk of respiratory depression, of simply ceasing to breathe in his sleep. She wasn't accusing. She was stating facts, appealing to logic, to common sense, to her professional authority. She was trying to triage the problem, just as she would a heart attack or an anaphylactic shock. She had expected anything: denial, confusion, even fear. But not this rage. Peter's face turned a deep crimson. The serenity vanished like a cheap veneer, revealing the raw, aged bitterness beneath. "You!" he rasped, lurching to his feet. His joints cracked in protest, but he seemed not to notice the pain. "You come back here, on your vacation, to judge me, to lecture me. Where were you all these years while I was rotting alive, while every single night was pure torture?" His voice erupted into a shout that filled the small living room. "Dr. Wolf was the only one who reached out a hand, the only one who showed me any compassion. And you, who ran off to your big city, you dare to call him a drug dealer? You have no right." The words struck with more precision than any scalpel. He saw her concern only as an insult, an attack on the one pillar of support he had left. His faith in a miracle was stronger than any medical fact. The argument was brief and devastating. It ended with Peter grabbing his precious bottle, limping into his bedroom and slamming the door. The lock clicked shut. Anna was left alone in the hostile house, the deafening silence broken only by the rhythmic ticking of a pendulum clock on the wall. Her first attempt had failed, her logic shattered against the wall of his blind faith. She had to change tactics, and for that, she needed information. She also needed groceries. The refrigerator was nearly bare. The only store, if one could even call it that, was in the town square. Stepping outside, Anna breathed in the cold, resinous air. The town, shrouded in the perpetual twilight beneath the pines, felt like a trap. The store smelled of yeast, mice, and stale merchandise. A drowsy-looking cashier sat behind the counter, staring blankly out the window. Besides Anna, there was one other customer, a solidly built woman in her mid-50s, dressed in a severe gray suit with her hair styled in a perfect French twist. Her piercing blue eyes locked onto Anna at once. It was Laura Evans, the town manager. Anna remembered her as the school principal, an authoritative woman who tolerated no dissent. Over the years, that authority had only hardened, solidifying into a monolith.
Anna Cole?
Laura Evans's voice was as severe as her suit, devoid of any warmth or pleasure at seeing a former student. "Hello, Ms. Evans." "Came to visit your father? Commendable," she said with an icy official politeness, as if reading from a file. Then, after a pause, she added, each word landing like a cold stone. "We value our peace and quiet here in Pine Creek, Anna, and we are very grateful to the people who provided for us. It would be a shame to disturb that peace." It wasn't just a statement. It was a warning. A threat veiled as a concern for the public good. Anna understood perfectly. She wasn't just up against a deluded old man. She was up against a system built around Dr. Wolf, and that system would defend itself. She gave a silent nod, grabbed a loaf of bread and a carton of milk from the shelf, and walked to the counter, feeling the town manager's heavy, scrutinizing gaze on her back. The night brought a chill and a gnawing anxiety. Anna lay in her old room, unable to sleep, listening to the house settle around her. The space behind her father's bedroom wall was quiet. Too quiet. Floorboards creaked, the wind howled in the chimney, a dog barked somewhere in the distance. Around 2 in the morning, as she was finally drifting into a restless sleep, a strange sound from outside reached her, a quiet, brief scrape of metal against rubber. Then another. She jumped to the window, but saw only the black silhouettes of the pines swaying in the wind. Nothing. She must have imagined it. She woke in the morning with a clear plan. Arguing with her father was pointless. Pushing the local authorities was dangerous. She had to approach this from another angle. She would drive to the county seat 20 miles away, where there was internet and cell service. She would run a background check on Dr. Arthur Wolf, verify his license, and look for reviews from places he'd worked before. There had to be a trail. After getting dressed, she stepped outside. Her old sedan was parked where she had left it, but something was wrong. She crouched down. Both front tires were flat. Lifeless pancakes of rubber were spread on the gravel. Looking closer, she saw neat, narrow punctures in each, made by something sharp, like an awl. A wave of helpless fury washed over her. She was trapped, physically imprisoned in this dying town. Lifting her head, she noticed something on the windshield. A light frost had settled overnight, coating the glass in a thin layer of ice. On its white surface, a single word had been crudely scratched in jagged, angry letters. Leave. The threat was no longer veiled. It was a direct warning. Someone didn't just want her to leave. They were willing to take action to force her. Anna scanned the street. Empty, silent. But she could feel dozens of unseen eyes on her from behind the gray curtains of the neighboring houses. The entire town was against her. She stood in the middle of the street, one woman against them all. Her father was locked away in his faith. The authorities had warned her. Unknown assailants had slashed her tires. What was next? Despair nearly consumed her, but then her professional training took over. Assess the situation. Find the weakest link. In this chain of fanatical belief and fear, there was only one potentially weak link. The one person whose job dealt in facts, not faith. The pharmacist. Anna walked resolutely toward the town square. The only person who might know the truth about the elixir's composition and not be a fanatic was Michael Bishop, owner of the local pharmacy. He would be the one ordering the supplies for Dr. Wolf's clinic. Crossing the square, she again felt the weight of heavy gazes, from the statue, from the community hall, and from Dr. Wolf's clinic, which occupied the renovated former town hall, dominating the space. Its windows, like vacant eye sockets, stared directly at the pharmacy. The bell above the pharmacy door chimed loudly in the cramped space. The air inside was thick and suffocating, a mixture of valerian, camphor, and archival dust. Hiding behind a high counter that served as a veritable fortress was the owner. Michael Bishop was the physical embodiment of fear. A thin, stooped man in a white coat that seemed far too large for him. He turned pale when he saw Anna. "Hello, Mr. Bishop," Anna said, her voice as even as she could manage. "Good afternoon," he replied in a quiet, broken whisper. His pale, darting eyes shifted nervously behind his large glasses. "I'm Peter Cole's daughter," she said, getting straight to the point. "I want to know the composition of the elixir Dr. Wolf prescribes for him. What components does he order from you to make it?" The panic on Michael's face was almost palpable. He began adjusting his glasses, fiddling with the hem of his coat, avoiding her gaze. That's confidential, Ms. Cole," he stammered. "I have no right. Dr. Wolf mixes it himself. I only supply the base components he requests." His eyes darted frantically toward the window, beyond which stood the sterile white building of the clinic. He was terrified of being seen, of being overheard. The man was paralyzed by fear. This conversation was useless. "I see," Anna said coldly. Realizing she would get nothing more from him, she turned to leave. At that moment, as she passed the edge of the high counter, something strange happened. Michael, still not looking at her and pretending to shuffle prescription pads, made a swift, almost invisible movement with his hand. Anna felt his cold, trembling fingers brush against her jacket pocket for a split second, slipping something small and hard inside. It was so fast, so discreet, she barely registered it had happened. She walked out onto the street without looking back, her heart pounding in her chest. She crossed the square, turned a corner, and only then, at a safe distance and certain no one was watching, did she reach into her pocket with trembling hands. Inside was a small, tightly folded piece of paper torn from a notepad. She unfolded it. Scrawled in a tiny jumping script were just a few words that changed everything. "It's not just the elixir. Check the quarry." Anna froze in the middle of the empty street. The cold wind whipped her hair, but she didn't feel it. The quarry. The old abandoned quarry a couple of miles from town, a wound on the body of the earth, a place where trash and rusting machinery had been dumped for decades. The secret, which had seemed like a simple medical scam involving drugs, had just morphed into something far darker, more sinister and dangerous. And it was leading her into the wilderness, into the heart of the darkness surrounding Pine Creek. Anna sat at her father's large kitchen table as the silence pressed down on her, thick and viscous as tar. On the rough, worn-out wooden surface lay the small scrap of paper. The words, scrawled in the pharmacist's spidery handwriting, pulsed in her mind, burned onto her retinas. It's not just the elixir. Check the quarry. Outside, the early autumn twilight deepened, the shadows of the pines creeping across the yard, devouring the last patches of light. She was trapped. Her car was disabled. Her father was sealed in his narcotic cocoon, and the entire town was watching her from behind their gray curtains, ready to snap its jaws shut. Panic rose in her throat like an icy wave. But years as a paramedic had taught her one thing. In chaos, you act. Action is the only antidote to fear. The decision formed, cold and clear as a scalpel's edge. She would go there, on foot, but only when the darkness became her ally, not her enemy. She stood and began methodically packing a makeshift go-bag. It was a familiar professional ritual, a way to reclaim the illusion of control over a situation that had long since spiraled out of it. Into her father's old canvas bag went a heavy metal flashlight with fresh batteries, a folding knife with a chipped but sharply honed blade, a roll of elastic bandage, a small bottle of hydrogen peroxide, and a pack of sterile gauze from her own first aid kit. She moved automatically, her hands working with the precise efficiency of a paramedic preparing for a difficult call. Each item dropped into the bag was a small victory over helplessness. She wasn't a cornered victim. She was a professional on a reconnaissance mission. At least, that's what she forced herself to believe. When the sky outside had finally turned to pitch black, Anna threw on a dark jacket and slipped silently out the door. The main street was out of the question. She moved through the back ways, across overgrown gardens and past collapsing fences. The crunch of dry leaves and the snap of twigs underfoot sounded deafening in the dead silence of Pine Creek. She crouched low, darting from one patch of darkness to the next, from the shadow of an old shed to a thicket of weeds. In the few lit windows, indistinct silhouettes flickered. It felt as though dozens of eyes were following her, as if the entire town were holding its breath, silently witnessing her flight. The hostility of the place had become almost tangible, a dense, cold fog that chilled her to the bone. The old logging road to the quarry began just past the last houses. It greeted Anna with an ominous silence and a wall of cold that smelled of damp earth and rotting pine needles. Here, under the dense canopy of the pines, the darkness was absolute. Anna switched on her flashlight. A narrow, bright beam sliced through the gloom, revealing a stretch of the needle-strewn path and the tree trunks on either side. The shadows they cast sprang to life, twisting into gnarled, grotesque figures that seemed to reach for her with branch-like arms. The forest of her childhood, once a vast playground of mystery and adventure, had become a hostile, living entity. Every rustle in the undergrowth, the hoot of an owl, the crack of a twig under her boot sent her heart leaping into her throat. This wasn't just a path. It was a descent into the depths of her own fear. After a half-hour walk that felt like an eternity, the trees parted. The air changed, becoming sharp with the unpleasant odor of rusted metal and stagnant water. She had reached the edge of the quarry. In the flashlight's beam, it looked even more monstrous than by day. A gaping gray wound in the earth with sheer, crumbling walls. At the bottom, stars reflected in murky, unnaturally green water. The skeletal remains of rusted machinery jutted out everywhere, like the fossils of prehistoric beasts. The wind howled as it swirled between the rock faces, creating a long, mournful sound. Anna shivered, pulling her jacket tighter. She moved along the edge of the precipice, the flashlight beam scanning the ground. Michael's note had been accurate. She found the spot almost immediately, a patch of freshly dug, still damp earth, roughly 6 by 10 feet. The ground had been tamped down, but unevenly, hastily. Nearby in the bushes lay several empty paper cement sacks and a stack of new, resin-scented planks. The thought struck her instantly, cold and sharp as a needle. It looked like a grave, a fresh, hastily dug grave. Who or what had Wolf buried out here, far from prying eyes? Her breath caught in her throat. She was standing at a crime scene. As Anna stood frozen in horror, trying to force her mind to work, a sharp crack of a breaking branch echoed from the darkness of the woods behind her. She spun around, thrusting the flashlight forward. The beam snatched 3 figures from the gloom. They had emerged from the trees as silently as ghosts. In front was the town manager, Laura Evans, her face looking as if it were carved from stone in the harsh light. Flanking her were 2 burly, broad-shouldered men, former loggers whose faces Anna vaguely recognized. They said nothing. They simply formed a semicircle, cutting off her only path of retreat back down the logging road. The trap had snapped shut. This wasn't a direct assault. It was something worse. Cold, calculated psychological pressure. The men stood motionless as statues, their faces impenetrable masks. They were simply blocking the space, creating a living wall. Laura Evans took a step forward, her severe suit looking absurd in this wild, desolate setting. "There's nothing for you to find here, Anna," she said, her voice quiet but laced with steel. All traces of the official politeness from the store were gone. "What is this?" Anna gestured with the flashlight toward the disturbed earth. "Dr. Wolf is preparing the foundation for his future wellness retreat," the manager replied without blinking. "This is private property. You're trespassing." The lie was so brazen, so obvious, that Anna was speechless for a moment. A wellness retreat in this backwater? A foundation on the edge of a crumbling quarry? They both knew it was a lie. "And the cement bags and lumber? For the foundation, too?" she pressed. Laura Evans didn't even bother to answer. She took another step, closing the distance. Her piercing blue eyes bored into Anna. "Some things are best left buried," she said slowly, enunciating each word. "For your own good. You were always a smart girl, Anna. Take the hint." Anna's gaze darted around in panic, searching for an escape route, any opening. It landed on an old, dilapidated tool shed made of time-blackened boards. It stood off to the side, near the forest's edge, and on its flimsy, rotting door, she saw a detail that sent an icy chill down her spine. A massive, gleaming chrome padlock hung from the rusted hinges. It was brand new. It shone in her flashlight beam like a sinister, alien implant on a body of decay. Why? Why would Wolf put such an expensive, heavy-duty lock on this useless, falling-apart shed? If he was just preparing a site, what could he possibly be hiding in there, in the dark, where no one was ever supposed to look? The mystery didn't just deepen. It now had the shape of a locked door. In that instant, Anna knew she was in mortal danger. The odds were impossibly stacked against her. Arguing, threatening, trying to reason, it was all pointless. They hadn't come here to talk. They had come to stop her, at any cost. Slowly, deliberately, so as not to provoke them, she raised her free hand, palm open, a sign of surrender. "I understand," she said quietly, her eyes fixed on Laura Evans. The manager studied her face as if trying to read her thoughts, then gave a short nod. On command, the 2 men stepped apart, creating a narrow passage, an escape corridor. Keeping the flashlight aimed forward, Anna slowly backed away, then turned and walked, feeling 3 pairs of heavy, unblinking eyes on her back. She wasn't just retreating. She was fleeing for her life. She ran. She ran back through the dark, hostile forest, heedless of the path. Branches whipped her face, her feet tangled in roots, but she felt no pain. Adrenaline and a primal fear flooded her system. She was certain now. Dr. Arthur Wolfe wasn't just a con man supplying old people with narcotics. He was a murderer. The fresh grave, the locked shed with something horrific inside, the manager and her thugs operating like a well-oiled machine, all the pieces of the puzzle clicked into one monstrous picture. And her father. The thought seared her with an icy fire. He wasn't just a victim of addiction. He was the patient of a killer, a witness who might have seen or heard too much. And he was in that house right now, alone, defenseless, under the influence of the poison this monster was feeding him. Stumbling, she burst out of the forest at the edge of town. The house. She had to get to the house, check on her father, make sure he was alive. She flew through the gate, ran up the creaking steps, and threw the door open. "Dad!" Silence. A dim light burned in the living room. Peter Cole was sitting in his deep armchair, his head tilted back. He was sleeping peacefully, snoring softly. The familiar bottle of elixir sat on the small table beside him. Anna pressed her fingers to his neck. His pulse was steady, if a little slow. His breathing was shallow but regular. He was alive. The relief was so intense her knees buckled. She leaned against the doorframe, gasping for breath. Just then, her eyes drifted to the wall above the fireplace, to the spot where, for as long as she could remember, his old hunting rifle had hung. The familiar grease stain on the faded wallpaper was there. The 2 massive wrought iron nails protruded from the wall. But they were empty. The rifle was gone. The chill she'd felt at the quarry was nothing compared to the icy terror that seized her now. She rushed to her father and shook his shoulder. "Dad! Dad, wake up! Where's the rifle?" He only mumbled something incoherent in his sleep, his eyes remaining closed as he sank back into his narcotic haze. It was impossible to wake him. She couldn't find out what had happened. The worst-case scenarios tore through her mind like frantic birds in a cage. Either her father, stupefied by the elixir, had given the rifle to Wolfe himself, or Wolfe, or his men, the 2 from the quarry, had been here, in the house, while she was gone. They had come in and simply taken it. The realization hit her with crushing force. She was trapped in this town. Trapped not just with a con man, but with a murderer. And now that murderer might have her father's rifle, a weapon she had seen in her father's hands since she was a child, a weapon she knew down to the last screw. The threat was no longer psychological, veiled, or passive. It was direct, armed, and deadly. Her improvised investigation, born of duty and guilt, had turned into a game of survival. And she had just realized that the next move in this game could be her last. Anna stood in the middle of the living room, the silence broken only by the steady ticking of the pendulum clock counting the seconds of her helplessness. Her gaze was fixed on the empty space on the wall. A grease stain and 2 lonely iron nails were all that remained of her father's rifle. The icy fear that had chased her through the forest began to transform, crystallizing into something else, something hard, sharp, and heavy. It was a cold, concentrated rage. She could no longer wait. She couldn't hope for outside help that would never come. She couldn't appeal to the conscience of a town that had none left. The missing rifle was the final straw, the last move in this twisted game. They had taken her car, trapping her here. They had taken her father, turning him into a compliant puppet. Now, they had taken the weapon. It wasn't just a warning. It was a declaration of absolute control. At that moment, staring at the empty wall, Anna Cole, paramedic, a woman trained to follow protocol, decided to break every rule. She would strike back, not as a daughter, but as a medic, not for revenge, but for a diagnosis. The plan formed instantly, a crystal-clear, ruthless image in her mind. She would infiltrate the sanctuary, Dr. Wolf's sterile lair. She would find irrefutable proof, something that couldn't be dismissed as a daughter's hysteria, a sample of his elixir for future analysis. And, more importantly, she would get the antidote, naloxone. In her world of emergency medicine, it was the absolute weapon against the opioid lie. A small glass ampule capable of tearing away the veil of blissful euphoria in seconds and dragging a patient back to reality. She would use it as a weapon of truth. Getting into the clinic that loomed over the town square was impossible without a diversion. She needed a perfect, urgent crisis, one that would force the sainted doctor to drop everything and rush to save his flock. Anna went to the kitchen and found the old rotary phone. Her fingers dialed the number she'd known since childhood, the town manager's office, now Laura Evans's direct line. Pinching her nose to alter her voice, she made it high-pitched, reedy, and frantic. "Laura! It's me, Claudia, Mrs. Albright's neighbor," she wailed into the receiver, channeling every ounce of fake hysteria she could muster. "It's Zena! Her heart! She's turning blue. She can't breathe," clutching her chest. "You have to get the doctor. Our Dr. Wolf." She'd chosen Zenaida Albright for a reason. The oldest, frailest, and most devoted of Wolf's patients. Refusing to help her would be tantamount to a public abdication of his role. Anna slammed the phone down without waiting for a reply. All she could do now was wait and hope the doctor's vanity outweighed his caution. She took up a position at the dark living room window, which overlooked the road from town. A minute passed. 2. 5. Then a rumble of an engine broke the night's silence. Headlights sliced through the darkness, and Wolf's car sped past, heading for the other side of town. The plan had worked. Under the cover of the moonless night, she moved toward the center of town again. This time, there was no fear, only cold calculation. She walked down the main street, making no effort to hide. Pine Creek was dark, but Anna felt unseen eyes upon her. It was as if every curtain, every black window pane held an observer. The town wasn't sleeping. It was watching, and its icy, judgmental silence was more terrifying than any scream. The feeling of complete and utter isolation peaked. She was a foreign body, a virus that the immune system of this decaying organism was trying to reject. And there it was, the clinic. A sterile, alien white building, a surgical implant in the decrepit body of Pine Creek. By day, it gleamed with sanitation. By night, it gaped with dark windows. Anna circled to the back. The rear door, leading to the utility rooms, had a simple mortise lock. She pulled the folding knife from her pocket, a skill she'd picked up on calls. Jimmying jammed apartment doors to reach dying patients now proved invaluable. She inserted the tip of the blade into the gap, feeling for the latch. Every scrape of metal against metal echoed like a hammer blow in the silence. Her fingers grew cold and clumsy. Seconds stretched into an eternity. Finally, a soft, welcome click. The lock gave way. She eased the door open and slipped inside, engulfed by a world of aggressive sterility. The sharp, acrid smell of bleach and alcohol assaulted her nostrils, overpowering everything else. Cold light from the street painted bizarre shadows on the stark white walls, making the space feel flat and unreal. There were no pictures, no plants, not the slightest hint of warmth. This place didn't heal. It dissected. Anna moved quickly, methodically, as if at a crime scene. Her targets, the office and the procedure room. She silently crossed the hall and pushed open a door. Wolf's office was as featureless as the rest of the clinic. A large desk in perfect order, not a single stray paper. She passed through into the adjoining treatment room. There it was. A tall medical refrigerator hummed quietly in the corner. Anna opened the door. The shelves were lined with neat rows of medication boxes, and on the middle shelf, in a separate plastic tray, she saw them. Dozens of identical dark glass bottles with handwritten labels. Restorative compound number 3. Dr. Wolf's elixir. She took one, the cold glass burning her fingertips. Her first piece of evidence. Now for the antidote. Naloxone. It had to be here, in the procedure room, for emergencies. Her eyes scanned the space, tables, an examination couch, cabinets. There. A gleaming steel drug locker with a magnetic lock. It was secured. Anna took out her knife again. This lock was tougher. She worked at it, biting her lip, listening for any sound. At last, another soft click. The door swung open. On one of the shelves, she saw the familiar cardboard box. Naloxone. She tore it open and pulled out a small glass ampule of clear liquid. The moment her fingers closed around the ampule, a wave of intoxicating triumph washed over her. She had it. In one hand, the poison, in the other, the antidote. She held the concentrated, irrefutable truth, a weapon that would shatter this empire of lies and fear. She had won. She wouldn't just expose Wolf. She would demonstrate his deceit in the most visceral way, yanking her father back to reality before the entire town. She was about to leave when she heard the sound of an approaching car, the crunch of tires on gravel. A car door slamming shut. Wolf. He was back. Had her diversion failed, or had he seen through her crude deception from the start? An icy wave of panic washed away her triumph. She heard a key turn in the front door lock. Footsteps. Calm, even, unhurried, the steps of a man returning to his own home. There was nowhere to run. Anna darted into the only possible hiding place, a small windowless supply closet filled with cardboard boxes. She pressed herself into the far corner, holding her breath. The door to the procedure room opened. Wolf entered, passing within feet of her hiding spot. She saw his shadow fall across the hallway floor, heard the creak of his office door, the rustle of papers. Then his footsteps were near again. He walked past the closet and toward the exit. The seconds were torture. She could hear her own heart, a frantic, thudding drum. The front door clicked shut, the sound of a car driving away. He was gone. Anna waited another minute that felt like an hour, listening. Silence. She crept from her hiding place, slipped out the back door, and fled into the welcome darkness. She had escaped. And she had everything she needed. The feeling of victory, sharp and bright as a flash of light after prolonged darkness, returned with redoubled force. She practically ran back to the house, clutching her 2 trophies, the ampule and the bottle. She could already picture it. Tomorrow, no more arguments, no more pleading. She would simply walk into the town square. Maybe Laura Evans would be holding one of her town meetings. Anna would step forward, draw the naloxone into a syringe, and in front of everyone, inject her father. They would all see. They would watch the veil of blissful stupor fall from his face and clarity return to his eyes. They would see the euphoria replaced by the raw, unvarnished truth of his pain. It would be her final, crushing argument. She was ready for this battle, and she was absolutely certain she would win. Riding this wave of euphoria, she threw open the living room door, ready to tell her father that it was almost over, that she was here to save him. And she froze in the doorway. In the deep, worn armchair, under the dim light of a floor lamp, sat her father, Peter. He was not asleep. His eyes were open, fixed on the man sitting opposite him. And there, in the small armchair she had loved as a child, sat Dr. Arthur Wolfe, a calm, almost paternal smile on his face. He was tall, elegant, with distinguished graying temples. Lying across his lap was her father's hunting rifle. With slow, methodical motions, he was wiping the barrel with an oiled cloth. Wolfe slowly raised his eyes to meet hers. His gaze was perfectly calm, without a trace of surprise or anger. In his dark, nearly black eyes, there was only a mild, condescending disappointment, like that of a teacher once again confirming a student's ineptitude. "I knew you wouldn't be able to resist, Anna." His velvety, enveloping baritone filled the room, sucking the air from it. "Your predictability is your greatest weakness. I've been waiting for you." Anna's gaze shifted from his inscrutable face to the rifle in his hands, then to her father, who sat as still as a wax figure, and back to Wolfe. All her euphoria, her intoxicating triumph from a false victory, evaporated in an instant, leaving only a ringing void and a nauseating cold in the pit of her stomach. She understood everything. Her call, her diversion, her risky break-in, her miraculous escape. It had all been part of his game. He had allowed her to do it. He had led her like a puppet on a string, anticipating her every move. The trap hadn't been sprung in the cold, sterile clinic. It had been sprung here, in the warmth of her own home, which had just become a prison. She was completely, utterly cornered, and all the trump cards, including her own weapon, were now in her enemy's hands. Anna stood rooted to the threshold, a pillar of salt. The air in the living room grew thick, heavy, and devoid of oxygen. Every sound, the steady ticking of the pendulum clock, the soft crackle of logs in the stove, was amplified to a deafening clarity. Dr. Arthur Wolfe held the rifle not like a weapon, but like a conductor's baton, a scepter confirming his absolute dominion over this small, insulated world. He wasn't aiming. He merely continued his methodical, fluid motions, the blued steel gleaming dully in the lamplight. "Your phone call as a neighbor was very unconvincing, Anna." His velvety baritone cut through the silence, as calm and steady as a healthy pulse. "Your voice trembled. Too much panic, not enough genuine shortness of breath. But I decided to play along. I had to let you get what you came for." He gave a subtle nod toward her jacket, where the ampule and the bottle in her pocket suddenly felt impossibly heavy, transformed from trophies into exhibits for the prosecution. Every word from the doctor fell into Anna's stunned consciousness like a drop of poison, spreading slowly through her veins. Her victory, her carefully planned diversion, her daring break-in, her triumph. It had all been nothing more than a scene in his meticulously directed play. He had allowed her to win. He had been waiting for her here. Checkmate. With a soft click, Wolf set the rifle down, leaning it against the chair. The gesture made it clear that a physical threat was unnecessary. His weapons were of a different, more effective kind. He leaned forward slightly, resting his elbows on his knees, his dark, nearly black eyes boring into her. They held no malice, only a deep, almost fatherly compassion that was more terrifying than any hatred. "You're a paramedic, Anna. You work on the front lines. Tell me, how many times have you arrived on a call knowing you were already too late? How many times have you, following protocol, injected adrenaline into a heart that no longer wanted to beat? Performed CPR, breaking the brittle ribs of the elderly, only to prolong their agony for a few more hours in a hospital ward, surrounded by beeping machines and the smell of disinfectant?" He spoke slowly, his voice weaving a web around her, constructing a line of reasoning from which there was no escape. "Our medicine is hypocritical. It fights for life as a biological process, completely forgetting about its quality. We've learned to preserve the embers, but forgotten how to respect the fire. We turn dignified human beings into helpless prisoners of their own bodies, tethered by tubes and wires, condemned to months, even years of humiliating pain. Physical pain, the pain of worthlessness, the pain of being a burden to those you love. Is that the life you fight so desperately to save?" He paused, letting the words sink in. Anna was silent, her mind refusing to formulate a rebuttal. Her professional pride, her certainty in her own righteousness, the very armor she wore, began to crack under the assault of his venomous logic. "I don't take their lives, Anna. I only take their pain. I give them what official medicine denies them: dignity. The chance to go quietly, without suffering, in their own homes, in their own beds. I am an artist who helps complete a masterpiece, not a barbarian who slashes the canvas trying to fix it. And you, with your naloxone, with your truth, you want to give them that pain back, to rip them from their peaceful sleep and hurl them back into their personal hell. Tell me, Anna, is that mercy?" His words were persuasive. His philosophy was seductive. And that's what made it monstrous. Anna shook her head, trying to break free from the spell, to push away the insinuating voice that had wormed its way into her subconscious. No. This was sophistry, manipulation. She wouldn't let him poison her mind. It wasn't the philosopher in her that answered, but the paramedic, the rescuer, a person of action for whom there were only two states: alive or dead. And her father was alive. She saw not a tragic philosopher, but a calculating killer who had found the perfect justification for his crimes. And in the armchair sat not his disciple, but his victim. Her professional duty, her oath, her profound personal guilt over her father, it all coalesced into a single, powerful, furious impulse. She had to act. Enough! Her voice was hoarse but firm. She pulled the naloxone ampule, a syringe, and the bottle of elixir from her pocket. Her hands moved with the quick, automatic precision of hundreds of emergency calls. The snap of the ampule breaking open sounded like a gunshot in the quiet room. She drew the clear liquid into the syringe, expelled the air bubbles. She didn't look at Wolf. She ignored his calm, scrutinizing gaze. She saw only the patient, the object to be saved. She took a step toward the armchair where Peter sat. He was still staring straight ahead, his faded blue eyes clouded by a narcotic haze. "Dad, I'm going to save you from him. I'm bringing you back," she whispered, her voice ringing with the absolute conviction of someone who knows they are right. of someone who has come to fulfill their duty. She raised the hand holding the syringe over his forearm, exposed by the rolled-up sleeve of his old shirt. The needle glinted in the lamplight. At the exact moment the tip was about to touch his dry, wrinkled skin, something she could never have foreseen happened. Slowly, with a visible, incredible effort, Peter's gnarled hand, a logger's hand, scarred and missing the tip of one finger, rose. His fingers came to rest gently but firmly on her wrist, halting the motion. He turned his head and looked at her. There was no longer any euphoria or fog in his eyes. There was only a bottomless, all-knowing exhaustion and a deep, quiet sorrow. He was present. He was fully conscious. "Don't, sweetheart," he said. His voice was weak, like the rustle of dry leaves, but it was perfectly clear and steady. "I know what's in this, and it's what I want." The words didn't just sound. They detonated in her mind, leveling everything. Her reality, her entire world built on rigid protocols, on the black and white logic of life and death, on her unshakable professional righteousness. It all collapsed into dust in an instant. "What?" was all she could breathe. "After your mother passed," he began, speaking slowly, struggling for the words but looking directly into her eyes. "The house felt so empty. Then this sickness came. Every joint, every bone, like something was gnawing on them from the inside. Day and night. For years. This isn't a life, Annie. It's a prison. I went from being a king of the forest to a prisoner in my own body. And in this prison, there wasn't a single moment of light. Only pain and loneliness." She remained standing like a statue, his hand still on her wrist, holding the syringe at bay. "Doctor, Wolf didn't lie to me. He came and he asked me, honestly. He offered me a choice. Continue this torture, or leave, quietly, without pain. He isn't a murderer, sweetheart. He's the only one who showed me true mercy. He gave me the right to choose, and I made my choice. He wasn't a victim. He was a man who had signed his final, most important contract. A man desperately trying to reclaim control over the only thing he had left. His own death." In the crushing silence that followed, broken only by her own ragged breathing, Peter answered her unasked questions. "The rifle. I gave it to him myself. Yesterday. I asked him to take it," he said, his gaze flickering toward the weapon leaning against the chair. "So I wouldn't be tempted. On a bad day. So I wouldn't get any stupid ideas." "And the quarry?" Anna whispered, clinging to the last thread of her shattered conspiracy theory. "What about the quarry?" Wolf interjected calmly. "I genuinely am planning to build a small hospice there. A wellness retreat, as Laura Evans put it. I had some building materials delivered. As you know, euthanasia is illegal in this country. One has to be discreet." The entire criminal narrative she had so painstakingly constructed, her elegant detective theory, crumbled to ash. There was no grave, no stolen weapon, no insidious deception. The reality was infinitely simpler and 1,000 times more terrifying. Anna looked down at the syringe in her hand, her weapon of truth, her instrument of salvation. It now seemed like an instrument of torture. She, Anna Cole, a paramedic conditioned by protocol to save lives at any cost, was faced with a situation where salvation was the ultimate act of cruelty. where her greatest skill, her calling, her pride, was not just useless, but actively harmful. She had wanted to bring her father back, but back to a world of unending agony. In that moment, something inside her broke. She was no longer the all-powerful savior in a uniform. She was just a daughter forced to make the most terrible choice of her life, to stand down and honor her father's will, no matter how dreadful it was. She hadn't lost to Wolf. She had lost to her own hubris. Her fingers slowly, so slowly, uncurled. The syringe fell to the old wooden floorboards with a dull, plastic clatter. The clear liquid seeped from the needle, forming a small, rapidly evaporating puddle. Wolf watched the scene with a quiet, understanding smile. There was no malice in his eyes, only the calm satisfaction of an artist who has completed his masterpiece. His victory was absolute. He hadn't just defeated his enemy, he had forced his enemy to concede his point, to voluntarily lay down her arms. The battle was lost. Anna sank slowly to the floor beside her father's chair, feeling a leaden weight settle into her limbs. A complete, all-consuming emptiness. She had lost the war for his life, but perhaps, for the first time in many, many years, she truly saw him. Not as an object of her care and salvation, but as a person. As a man with the right to his own final choice. She raised her eyes to Wolf. Her gaze held no more rage, no fear, no will to fight, only a cold, scorched earth emptiness. "Congratulations, Doctor." Her voice was flat and tired, devoid of all emotion. "You've invented the perfect cure. One that kills the disease along with the patient." She turned away from him, no longer wanting to see his face. She took her father's large, gnarled hand in hers. His fingers gave a weak squeeze. Anna looked at their joined hands, accepting his choice, accepting her defeat, accepting her new, bitter, unbearable reality.